Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm pleased to see a crowd this big, considering that we're opposite the experimental gameplay workshop. You're probably all people who couldn't get in, right?
I was just going to make that
yeah.
That's not funny.
My name is Ernest Adams. I'm going to be the moderator today, and I have been instructed to give you the same instructions that you've been hearing all week long, namely, please turn off cell phones and other noise-making devices. Apparently, this has proven to be a problem in the past because game developers don't listen and don't obey instructions. And also, please be sure to check your email for the feedback form so that you can fill out your feedback about our panel after it's over. I think, oh yes, and there's something about please no unauthorized filming. You can film the slides if you want, but there's only one slide and you're looking at it. So
we're very prepared, yes.
Right. So before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to start with an anecdote. I used to work at Electronic Arts for EA Sports. And about 1995, I went to one of the big shot executive producers at EA Sports, and I said, I've got a brilliant idea. I said, let's make a game about horses. There are a lot of horse sports. There's rodeo and dressage and show jumping and cross country and flat racing and all kinds of other stuff like that. And if we do that, we will own every little girl between the age of 9 and 12 in the world. And he, of course, the executive producer was a he, said, no, 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 girls don't play video games. And I said, well, they might play video games if there were some games they wanted to play. And he said, no, 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 we don't like girls. We don't know about girls. We don't care about girls. We're not interested in girls. Go away, shut up, do your job. And so that was the end of that. That Christmas, what happens? Out comes Barbie Horse Riding Adventure. It is colossal. And one week, it was the biggest selling PC game on the charts. Outstripping all the shoot-'em-ups and everything else. And, we could have had that money. Now, admittedly, we didn't have the Barbie name, which was kind of, I think, partly key to its success. But that, gives you an idea of the attitude that was floating around at the time among the conventional big publishers. It's just, games are a boy thing, we're not interested. So, but obviously, as you know, there were a number of girl games that were made in the 90s, and many of them were made by these people. So let me introduce our panelists. You have the privilege of being with some of the heaviest hitters in game design. We will start with the far end, Sheri Graner, who is currently a senior designer at Electronic Arts, formerly director of product development at Her Interactive. Next is Jesyca Durchin Schnepp, who is currently Director of Girls Creative Content at Mattel, and the person who was behind some of the early Barbie games. And she gave an absolutely fabulous lecture at the Game Developers Conference about 20 years ago.
Oh, my God. When I was 10.
The content of which I scribbled down as fast as I could and ripped off for my book on game design. And then, yes, right. Brenda Laurel, who should need no introduction at all, currently owner of Neo-Gaian Design Strategy Consultancy and founder of Purple Moon, one of the most highly publicized of the 90s Games for Girls publishers. And finally, Laura Groppe, former president of Girl Games Incorporated and now president of Girls Intelligence Agency, providing marketing and PR information. So I'm going to do as little talking as possible so that they can deliver you as much wisdom as they have. But I do want you to expand on your introductions just a little bit by saying briefly what you were actually building, the names of the titles and things that the people would remember here from that era. So start it with Sheri, say.
On my end. Okay, I was head of product development for Her Interactive. We did McKinsey & Company was our first title. It was, we billed it as a social adventure, which sounded really weird to people back then, but today would be considered a normal title. We also did a Vampire Diaries title based on the license, and then we moved over into doing Nancy Drew. I did want to say we did ask Megan Geiser to join us on this panel, but she was unable to attend the conference this year, so we miss having Megan here. So anyway, that's what I did.
Let's see, so I started in 1995 at Mattel, and my first project was Barbie Fashion Designer. And then consequently, I did almost every Barbie game. I'm not horseback riding or magic hairstyler. There were some other producers I worked with, but towards the end in 2000, I left, and I had been the executive producer of Girl Games. But I went on to found a company that was dedicated to social gaming for girls called Digital Play Space, and maybe you guys played Digital Dollhouse at one time or another, and that was my game too.
I got hired by Interval Research in 1992, and my job was to do research on girls and technology. We discovered, obviously, that girls weren't getting their share of technology education for various reasons, and we did a huge research project for 4 years on girls and play. And during the course of that, decided that, gosh, we could do some computer games that might get girls' hands on this tech. So we founded Purple Moon. The first products were Rocket's New School and Secret Paths in the Forest. We went on to do 10 titles, more titles in the Rocket series, more titles in the Secret Paths series, and our last title was Starfire Soccer Challenge.
So they're all so much older. I just started in this industry. I started Girl Games with a grant from the National Science Foundation in partnership with Rice University to investigate how to pull girls into technology. And that founded Girl Games. And in order to, we were very evidence-based and trying to come up with ideas for content. And we were based in Austin and had worked for Jesyca on many occasions. Our methodology was doing slumber parties around the country because that was a way that we felt like girls were already gathering together. And that informed a lot of our ideas for content development. And then we worked with Mattel and Sony and Activision and did original titles as well as licensed titles. And and then that morphed into doing more and more research, which is what I have now, GIA, Girls Intelligence Agency.
Okay, thank you.
We're so good.
Forgive me for popping up and down like a jack-in-a-box. My back is not what it used to be. You can ignore me, pay attention to them. You mentioned that your work was evidence-based. And, you know, that's a really weird concept to the game industry, where most of us think, you know, oh, we're artistes and, you know, we create from our heart and so on. But both you and Purple Moon were very much into, you know, evidence-based design. And I wanted to ask Brenda, or start by asking Brenda and move on to any others who have something to say about it. What was your goal with the research that led to Purple Moon, and how did that change over time?
Oh, good question. So our goal was to understand what was going on with girls and boys and play. There was this, you know, at the time, $6 billion business with an empty lot next door, where girls might be playing things. So we felt that it was important to meet girls where they were. So originally the research was aimed at understanding how girls play, because, you know, if you'd ask the question, why don't girls play computer games, you would not get a useful answer. But if you ask the question, how do girls play, you might get a useful answer. So that's what we ended up looking at. Our original goal was about computer literacy. It was about giving girls their fair share of hands-on with technology. But as an inveterate feminist, as time moved on, and I started hearing the stories of these kids, it became really important to me. I got a heart engagement, I guess, with what we were learning, that it's such a tough time of life for girls, being a tween. They suffer from a lot of difficulties. One of the patterns we saw over and over was kind of a sense of social inevitability about what happened to them. that you have to work to get over as a young girl. We learned a lot of things about social status and play patterns and things. And it then became more my mission to understand how we might create emotional rehearsal space for a lot of different kinds of girls to get over that hump of between being a kid and being a teenager. And we were really interested in recognizing and representing the diversity of the girls that we interviewed.
Okay. Sorry, please, jump in.
And we took that learning and turned it into money. No, so it was funny starting in Barbie because I actually got the job because my resume was stuck to another person's resume and put through the fax machine. The fax machine, for all of you who don't know what faxes are, it's a machine, and it would take, And I remember Nancy Martin, who was the executive producer at the time, who also should be up here, and I haven't heard from her in a while. She's like, I think your name is spelled so weird, and her name is Nancie, and I am Jesyca, and that was reason enough for me to get the job at Mattel. So if you think that it has to be like a bunch of resume things, you're like, eh. But we were taking that knowledge and saying, okay, we know that this is happening, and I'm an anomaly. I had a computer in 1978. Woo. And if anybody wants to buy it, it's in our garage. And it's like this big, and then it's got, but I was one of the first kids to ever play Zelda, because it was just a text-based game. And so my whole life, I was like, okay, girls play with games because I played with games. And then we started talking about this research, and I was just happy to be at Mattel because I'm a Barbie freak. And so I'd dress up all my dolls for each meeting, and it was great. And they were like, no, we really think that there is a reason, there's a purpose for this. And not everybody knows this, but fashion designer was not created internally. It was actually created by a 7-year-old, E.J. Rifkin, who was the daughter of my boss, who was our genius in-house. And his whole point, which I think goes off of what Brenda's saying, was not to create a game for girls. Have no difference between you're playing with your Barbie on your kitchen floor and a computer, that it should be a seamless interaction. Because girls were sensitive to barriers, and you just want it to be fun and sort of that simple transfer, so it's not like, oh my God, I'm putting in a CD-ROM, what is this? It's just the extension of play. So that was really Mattel's philosophy in those first years.
We, Her Interactive had our head of production was Patricia Flanagan, and she had kind of a combined family with, I think it was 8 or 9 kids. And she recognized that her daughters were not playing the games that American Laser Games was the parent company, was not playing the games that American Laser Games were making. And she was like, this is a huge marketing opportunity. This is a huge market that needs to be, that is just waiting. And so she set out to try to fill that gap or build the building on the empty lot, and found me at a GDC, where I was working as a CA, by the way, and interviewed me and brought me in to head up and to help her get this game out. We worked with the Albuquerque Independent School District, and we had 3,000 girls that we worked with, and we brought in what we called our design team, and we had them pick out, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. We had them pick out their leaders, and we brought them in, and they absolutely directed the design on the McKinsey & Company title. And we got a lot of kickback from it about, this is just stereotypes, you're just doing fashion, what's wrong with you people, you're doing terrible things. And we kept saying, but this is what the girls asked for. We're doing what they wanted us to do in their game, and we got boxes and boxes of letters thanking us for doing a game for them. And so that made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon for, in a more typical general fashion, that we find ourselves having to defend our position and needing to go out and collect the data to prove that this is a demographic worth selling to. And then ultimately large commercial successes occurred, so that just kind of kept building on itself. And arguably today, look at this audience, this didn't exist before. And so the population, we've done a tremendous job from what I can tell, albeit there is this, it leads, what I'm seeing is it's leading this conversation towards this inclusion and diversification of gameplay. And I think that's important for an industry that is this large, that has been able to make so much money off of a fairly narrow gameplay design scope. And so I feel like way back in the 90s, and probably the gamers before us are saying the same thing, like the iterations that you're seeing and the creative diversity that you're seeing is a part of the evolution of the industry. And our voice is a particular voice, and we needed to find out, what does this consumer want, so that we could start to feed that consumer to make the money to prove to the publishers that this is worth investing in. Yep. And so I think that groundwork has definitely been laid.
Mm-hmm. I felt, I should say something more in Ernest's response. From my perspective as a second-generation feminist, I felt then, and I kind of do now, apologies, that there is something about not just Barbie, but the pink aisle in general, that is a hegemonic representation of what women are supposed to be, that it enforces the traditional stereotypes in a pretty damaging way. And so as time went by for me, I was the ugly smart kid with glasses. I knew all about this. If you played the games, I was Mavis. There needed to be a way for girls to feel positive about themselves that wasn't part of that hegemonic understanding of what the feminine should be. I felt it keenly as a kid growing up. And I saw it in the feelings of the girls I interviewed. So part of it, I think, for me, was to present a balance, if you will, to the pink aisle games, so that we had more of a range in the offering, not as an instead of, but as an also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's the also that's the important thing, because that was what was so weird, is that it's not, it's that we didn't build the pink aisle.
Yeah.
That's not us.
That's not us. We didn't do that.
Well, no, but no.
Maybe.
You built your product line, and
Which
then,
was pink.
But then they built everything else.
No, but
and
everything was
defined
pink.
it.
Right.
It came. It came to define the market, rather because when fashion designer came out, we were all excited. This broke the door open for us because we'd been fighting girls don't play games, and all of a sudden the industry went, wow, girls do play games, and then they said, get me some of that. And we'd be like, okay, here's a horse game, here's a detective game, and they went, no, we want Barbie. And we'd be going, only Barbie can be Barbie. Anything else we give you is not going to be Barbie. And girls should have everything including.
So one of the things to break down in just that is the thing that they should have been saying is give us TV support. So Barbie Fashion Designer isn't about it just being groundbreaking game and all kinds of things. It was one of the first CD-ROMs to be television advertised. And people don't know, like when it first came out, the first week of sales, I remember being so nervous, like, how much did we do? We sold 11 copies, 4 of which my mother bought. Even though she couldn't have played it, she was like, oh, I'll just take all of these. And she said, I felt bad. They were all the other games were like empty, and then yours were just there. And we went to our CEO, who was Jill Berard at the time, and I said, we gave a speech and said, what really needs to happen is we need TV advertising. And she said, I'll never forget, she's like, I believe in this, and I have a personal fund that I think we can do some experiments with TV advertising. And me being really young and naive, I thought she was paying it out of her own pocket.
You were fine with that.
I was like, wow.
You didn't know Jill.
I was like, wow, she's really generous. There's so much to unpack. It's like you can talk about Barbie and we talk about like having balance. To me, it was also always the balance between games that were all about death and destruction and games that are about creativity. So for me, plus a huge Barbie fan, played with Barbie until I was 16, really understood her as a brand and as sort of a dynamic expression as opposed to kind of putting her into a box and say this is her representation for most people. I really felt like what we were doing was saying, okay, there's another option. And it was hard, and a lot of times, and still to this day, you get people who are like, oh, it's Barbie, and so it's these things. And it wasn't. It was a lot of different people and an opportunity. And just have been the one-time deal.
Yeah. We did television advertising too, and that might have been the most fun part,
It is fun.
representing what the games were in TV ads, and I'm still very proud of those ads. And boy, you could tell the difference. We ended up in the top 100 with both of our launched games because of the television advertising.
But no one ever talks about that. Nobody ever talks about the machine that is Mattel Marketing, that was Mattel Marketing. My Mattel Marketing counterpart sitting out there, she's like, okay, yes. But it was both at the same time. And I think that what's true of a lot of games now is that you can't get past all this noise. Mm-hmm. There is no way. There's a game for every niche group, every type of play pattern, but how do you actually get seen? And then how does that become a movement? It's different.
We didn't have any TV advertising.
And there's also, it seems to me that there's such a paucity of diversity in play patterns and shooters and war games, and it's like, don't you guys get bored with that shit? I mean, you're doing the same thing over and over. So having play patterns that are about creating stuff that a doll can wear, or managing your social status in a group of kids, I mean, these are play patterns that nobody had looked at, and I still don't see enough of that kind of experimentation across the hall. And by the way, we're the experimental game designers.
Absolutely.
We're very much in an experiment.
We're also some of the first indies.
Yeah, first
'Cause
indies, that's true.
We had to publish ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even you were.
Mattel Media, because Mattel was so worried about this, they were like, don't tell anybody what you're doing. They created a small company, like a startup within this big company of Mattel. We were in a different building.
Yeah, I
It's
noticed we're
called
down the street.
We were down the street. We were
In a
like,
warehouse.
so you're making TV commercials? I'm like, no. You're making games, like board games? No. and yet I couldn't explain it to them. And then Fashion Designer came out in the '96 Toy Fair.
And they wouldn't have guessed either.
They wouldn't. They had no idea.
Yeah.
And to this day, they probably still don't have any idea. But the weird thing was, so it's '95 and 2000, and we were all so deep into it. And then I started looking back, and I started doing the Barbie movies. I became an independent producer, and then was working on the movies. And then I went and looked again at the games group, and I don't know what happened to all the girls. It was like, we did this, and I thought, oh, from now on, there's going to be tons of games for girls, and it was gone. By 2006,
Yep.
there were no, I went into THQ and pitched All-Star Cheer Squad. So my thing was also about the Wii and how I was seeing girls on it. I'm like, it's time to do it again. Let's
Right.
just do it again. And then we did it, and then the financial crisis happened. And again, I was like, but that doesn't matter. There'll still be girls. They're still not girls.
Well, I think, though,
It's different.
the boom occurred, to your point, where the existing system in place required TV advertising. The other piece was the boom in the toy industry for the female consumer, that in and of itself. And the third piece was the platform. So that the CD-ROM was sort of this window where girls were already using this device, and so now there was content for them on that device, whereas that platform isn't so much there, and arguably I think our research would show that it's all mobile, and that this is a new huge opportunity for this consumer that I think we benchmarked, and now that can be built on from this new generation of gamers, is it's all mobile. And I'm going to be up here and say that Instagram is the entertainment space for this demographic, and it plays out in all the play patterns that we identified very early on. And when you watch these girls on these different platforms now, that's what's happening for them. And the opportunity, I think, creatively is there to figure out how can we leverage that, because I think that's a tremendous opportunity that this era of the 90s of gaming really identified, and now mobile is there, and the audience penetration is there, and so now there is this new opportunity.
We discovered in our research, just historically speaking, that the console was a big problem in working with girls as an audience, that probably 90% of the girls that we interviewed and surveyed said that game consoles were for boys and personal computers were for anybody. So the CD-ROM was a way to unlock an ungendered platform. And that was a real opportunity for all of us, I think.
That's true.
That was big.
But then Mattel decided we were going to be on a game console.
And it worked.
It sort of worked. It did. It just, one of the things I was asked to do in 97, 98 was to actually speak at Sony and to talk about the PlayStation and talk about doing some girls' projects. And I gave a speech about hair play and makeup play. You can imagine how well that went over. And I was literally told, never come back here again. Never, ever come back here again. We don't want to hear about hair play. And I'm like, it's going to look so awesome on this engine. And they're like, we don't need any of that. Please leave.
Oh my God, Jesyca.
And look
I
at
did this. I
color, look.
consulted for Sony on girls the same year you did.
That's so funny.
And they were just like, you know, it was like,
Yeah.
you know, dicking around.
And then we went to England. So we went the next, so I was like, well, where we're going to do? I'm like, my general manager was like, I don't know, what do we do now? I'm like, let's go to Europe. Let's find somebody within this whole Sony thing that's going to understand. And so Sony Europe put out Barbie, was it Barbie Detective? Barbie Detective? The first, Barbie Writing Club on the console. Thank God you're here. And it was a hit. I mean, and it was right for the time and right for the platform because so many of the consoles were also going through this change where they were getting better and better upgrades.
Yeah.
And so those were starting to slide down to the girls in the family.
We pitched to Sony.
Everybody,
We all get
and-
kicked out.
and-
That's awesome.
I sat across the table from him, and he was on the phone closing a multi-million-dollar licensing deal with us sitting there in the office. And then he put the phone down, and he looked at me, and he said, "Games for girls, huh?" And I said, "Yes, sir, that's what we're doing." And we started into the pitch. He says, "What can you give me for $150,000? And I was like,
man.
Not much.
design doc?
A punch in the nose, right?
Yeah, $150,000.
Okay. Well, after funding 4 years of research to the tune of about $8 million, Paul Allen of Interval Research came to see our first web demo, and he sat there and he said, "Wow, that's cool. Can you do that for boys?" And I was like, "Are you fucking kidding? Have you paid no
Anything
attention
outside?
at all?" You know, it was very special.
Yeah, there were a lot of those meetings.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now you would say, so I was at Disney in 2000, when did Disney buy Lucas? 13, 14? Anyway, I was
Yeah,
there.
13.
And I also worked as an Imagineer because there was a feeling at Imagineering in Disney was that, well, girls don't like those type of rides. And I'd sit in meetings, I'm like, how can you say this? But my favorite meeting was Star Wars. They just bought Star Wars, and they had all these people in the room, and they were talking about interactive and talking about toys. And they said, well, there can't be any girls in any of the commercials or any of the planning. And my boss had brought me in, and he's like, I could see him in this, like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I'm getting madder and madder and madder. And finally, the guy looks at me, he's like, I can tell you have something to say. I'm like, what are you thinking?
What are you
What
thinking?
the fuck are you thinking?
I would have had an aneurysm.
But I was like, if you were sitting in here and you told me that you couldn't make Star Wars for black people, we would have this entire conversation, and I'd be like on the phone with my lawyer. And and now you can say that and look at me in the face and think it's not a big deal. I mean, in some ways, what we're talking about was a specific time, but anybody who tells you now that this is only for girls or only for boys, it's bullshit. It just is. We can used to use all our curse words, and they can't
We
put it
can't
anywhere. They
Yeah.
had to bleep us out.
Well,
That's
they're
awesome.
not. I don't think they're even taping. So
It's good.
it's all good.
It's a camera back there.
I don't know about
We're
that.
still under the radar.
There's a camera right there.
Fuck! There's a camera.
Brenda, you're awesome.
So sorry. So sorry. Well, it's still happening. Ray was not one of the dolls and the first set of action figures out of the new.
Yes,
Yeah.
but they weren't going to have. And then the other thing was, because I'm a mom of a 12-year-old boy, and they said, and
Serves you
we
right.
don't want to have any. I know, right? We don't want to have any moms involved either. I was like, wait, what is that? But that's also part of this. So this isn't just about gender-based. This is about understanding what girls want at different ages. This is understanding about how girls create community, have created community, and are creating every single day. So, now it's just such a different time period. But then there were all kinds of other things going on, too.
Well, I think they're still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, are there any women devs in the audience who haven't experienced a bunch of crap at work? Oh, good. Do you work in all-woman companies?
And I would go into our developers and say, how many women do you have working here? And they would inevitably, they would say, our receptionist is a woman.
Yeah, there's 2 over in
Our
marketing.
marketing person
Yeah.
is a
Our
woman.
security guard.
And I would say, your marketing person, I'm like, is your marketing CMO like the top? Oh, no. It's our junior marketing person.
Yeah.
She's really cute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, our company was 80% female, and if I could have bottled and sold all the drama that went on in that company between women, I'd be rich now.
That's actually a show. You could pitch that HBO.
I could, yeah.
That's actually.
Like a Silicon Valley X.
X,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
Ernest is like, oh my God.
you know,
Oh, no, he knew what he was getting into.
well, first I did want to mention, because Jessica's told me about it, that after she gave her talk here at GDC those years ago, she got a great deal of hate from, in fact, the vigorously feminist community. She got a great deal of hate from all the men who said you shouldn't be making video games at all. She also got a great deal of hate.
in the audience and said this, and I'm like, wow, we're being taped.
Then you knew you were on the right track.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, it was
But-
really wild.
It's
And-
never
Yeah.
happened to me.
or me. No, it's yeah.
But I wanted to look a little bit to the future because, you know, as we say, things have changed. That kind of 90s, you know, boom was temporary. A boom in, shall we say, industry interest was temporary. But now 48% of all gamers are female. And in fact, in the United Kingdom, it's over 50%. You know, which is pretty astonishing to those of us who grew up in an era when the stereotype was they were all 13-year-old boys. So, and of course, much of this, as Laura has pointed out, is driven by mobile. The question is now, is there still room for creating content just for girls? I mean, is there still a demand for girl games, even if it's necessarily on mobile or something like that? Or do we think that's kind of done and it's all just going to be sort of gender neutral?
You feeling neutral, baby?
No.
No.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask everybody out here, how many of you are in a company that 48% of the people you work with are women? Excellent.
Oh, the same people. That's excellent.
That's so good.
Exciting.
That means we keep doing our job.
We keep doing our job.
You what?
You make what? Oh, Covet Fashion. Oh, yeah, that game.
All right.
That's cool. So I think that what we should be doing is making games that women enjoy and that everyone can enjoy. Yes. Like that's, and finding those type of play patterns. Are there things specifically for girls? I think there are play patterns that are definitely more for girls, but you find them on your mobile games. You find dressupgames.com. Do you guys know that site? So when I did Digital Dollhouse, it was an online game, and you could decorate a dollhouse in 3D, sort of 2.5D online. And we could not get traction. And every VC person we went to, they were like, crickets. They're like, what? They want to do what? And then we hooked up with Dress Up Games, and they broke our server like within 10 hours. Like, it was just girls from all over the globe pouring in and wanting to do more of what they were getting little bites from in a dressupgames.com environment. And I think that we have a lot of that opportunity today where you say, okay, this is a hit. It's also figuring out what makes a hit anymore. Because you used to have to sell a certain amount to make, to say, okay, this is worth it. And now you have a lot more smaller audiences who would pay. So it's about economy as opposed to about gender.
I guess I would disagree in that I think there is space for games that are aimed at a female or female-identified audience. If you look at, overlapping Gaussian distributions, right? We're talking curves here, we're not talking stereotypes, but there are differences in cognitive and social abilities that events, either because of genetics or culture or both, that predispose certain individuals to like certain kinds of play patterns better than others. And we ought to be looking at, to me, the open opportunity space for people who are interested in serving girls is to look at that sector, those questions about social intelligence, about spatial navigation, about the things that might interest us in science or help us express ourselves in art, that there are different ways of understanding and being that are incredibly loaded with cultural stuff, and that may also be, to a large extent, predetermined genetically. If you look at what goes on with our friends, the pygmy chimps, I advise you to review your primatology, and you will see some differences. So it's not just us humans who have them. That's not to say that all females do this and all males do that, but there are opportunity spaces in developing abilities and confidence in females and female-identified people that are distinctive and deserve to be served and not watered down into some kind of neutral kumbaya crap. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the challenge of that question, because I think what I do see is otherwise porn and sports hijack the whole market.
That's true.
Because that drives the technology, and that's fine. I'll give them that. And then what? So I think the creative challenge comes, Roblox, they just announced their numbers this past week. I mean, that is tremendously successful, huge female population, and I think what's compelling about that is within that environment, the user-generated entertainment. And so will we see girls developing within Roblox some environments that are navigating in a different way? Just like with Minecraft, huge female consumer space. They play it way differently. So when you're in a girl's environment in Minecraft, it's just a different experience. And so, I don't know, maybe we'll see more of that kind of a thing. And again, Instagram, primarily female users. And what can we do with that? And I do think that is, I never thought about it that way, but I do think it's going to end up being where there is a lot of places where a boy's not going to feel comfortable in a lot of those spaces. And that's cool too. I mean, I think there's space for that.
We worked really hard to give Purple Men cooties. We worked, honestly.
And now with AR, you can do that.
Yeah. The idea was to make this obvious that boys, this is not for you. Because we knew that if a boy played a game and pronounced it lame, his little sister would never touch it.
Right.
So we didn't want his hands on it to start with. And I think that was a pretty good strategy.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing what you're saying. I think that's a wonderful opportunity to study, too, these worlds that differently gendered people make and to learn from that.
Yeah.
That's
Where
really
will that
cool.
gameplay go?
Well, and I really like the concept that you're saying. You're talking about it as if this is going to sound weird, but I almost want to remove the gender label from it completely and just talk about play patterns. We would never say, should we make a game for people who like golf or not? That's a silly thing. We would talk about the play pattern. Should we make games for people who like this particular type of play pattern? And the fact that we have for ages, we've kind of demonized and trivialized particular play patterns is silly to me. I mean, and that's part of why I started doing this all that time ago is, we work in an incredibly smart industry, and I thought this was a really stupid mistake they were making. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of money out there. And so I like the idea of backing us up and thinking about play patterns and what play patterns are out there that we can use and explore and provide entertainment to and find markets that like them, and just remove the gender label from it completely. And whoever likes that type of play pattern, there's something there for them.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
It also requires us, though, to be open to finding out new things. Yes. So it's a dual kind of idea that you can learn about. You can come into it and say, this is what we know girls like, and then be completely closed off to new ideas. When we were doing All-Star Cheer Squad, I originally had pitched it and said, it's cheerleading, there's social components, there's going to be drama, there's going to be clothes changes, cheerleading. And then I discovered, that cheerleading is a sport. I didn't realize what a hardcore sport until I met, because it was all motion capture. And so I met real cheerleaders. And then they explained to me what these championships look like, and I saw Bring It On, and we had the same choreographer. And these people get hurt. Like, they were like, we do this, and I said, we're animating it. You do not need to throw that person up in the air. We'll pull it apart. It'll look fine. They're like, no, that's not cheerleading. Cheerleading, you do those things. So I think it's, yes, we can make stuff that will appeal to girls, but everybody on both sides, girls in the audience have to be willing to find something new, and people who are creating the games need to be open to those ideas too.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, San Francisco, great example that it is of everything. The whole notion of binary gender is kind of an outworn idea. I mean, if you were going to try to express the 37 genders you see in this city, you'd have a lot of tiny little games with tiny little audiences. So there's a way in which it's a kind of an outworn notion.
We should be talking. We should talk about play patterns.
Some of you will probably remember that at the time, I wrote a harshly critical article in Kama Sutra because in the 90s, I felt like a number of the games for girls were being made as jump on the bandwagon, quick, cheap, you know, not knockoffs exactly, but quick, cheap titles that were, you know, offered like 4 or 5 hours of gameplay, but they still cost 40 or 50 bucks. And I felt like an awful lot of this was simply a quick marketing phenomenon rather than something real. I'm not accusing anyone here.
Better not be.
Yeah, right. Well, I knew about your $8 million worth of research. So yes. But you know, when Sheri asked me to moderate this panel, I wasn't entirely sure of the welcome I was going to get. But you know, that does sort of lead to an interesting question. You know, a certain amount of it, you must admit, was just marketing fluff and people grabbing for some pink dollars. So what do you think was actually kind of accomplished at the time in real terms? I mean, what did you do that really broke open the doors?
So all the girls here who have played any of our games, would you raise your hands? That's what we did.
Yeah.
I tell you, at least once a week, if not more often, I get email or a letter from somebody who played Purple Moon games, who says to me, "You changed my life. I can't thank you enough. I'm studying design now," or whatever. I just had a wonderful meeting with a young woman who's going to become a terrific game dev as a result of, I think, of having had that space and that example. So for me, that's what happened. That's what happened. And when I get those letters from girls now in their 20s or whatever, I send them a copy of Utopian Entrepreneur, which really explains how the sausage was made, so that they can understand, you know, what it actually meant to be doing what we all did. That's what happened. I think there was a lot of empowerment that persists to this day. There's a Facebook group called I Miss Purple Moon. You know, we mattered to people. And you mattered to people, and we all did, and we changed some lives, and some of those lives that got changed are moving forward in culture making today, and I think that's really important. That's the thing I'm proudest of.
To the pink game idea, I remember being really excited when there were other knockoffs and things. It didn't bother me because we had Barbie and
right.
But so there was not going to be a competition that way. But I remember a dad sent me a picture when I was at Mattel in Media of his daughter and both of his daughters. And one was like maybe 4 and the other one was 7. And he had carved them a chair to sit in front of the computer because he said that they kept bringing their chairs closer together to play at the same time. And at the time I was having this whole conversation about social connection and how multiplayer, how that was making sense. And I was pushing to get more and more budget so we could at least experiment. And they were saying, I don't know, are girls going to play with other girls? Like, I was like, really?
How much of our research did you need to see?
And I said, you look at how people play with adults. Like, that's, again, no different, seamless. So I was excited that these girls were playing together and that they had other things to choose from. Like, it felt like they can't play Barbie fashion designer all the time. Right?
Well, and people, and I was telling you guys this earlier, the reporters, when the 4 of us were kind of all there up at the forefront, and I mean, reporters they were just all over this. They would come to me and they would ask me questions, and what they really wanted me to do was dig dirt on the other developers. And I was like, are you crazy? We have to succeed, all of us.
Right.
We must all succeed because we owe it to our girls and we owe it to our audiences. We must be there. We must have, and if any of us fail, my heart will be broken because we must all succeed. And that they'd always not print that.
Ernest, you naughty man.
Yeah, I've been nervous about meeting you again, because we haven't spoken for like the last 18 years.
Ernest and I were both in the founding group of this conference.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. With him, what's his name?
Yeah.
He was on
Well, since it was a big topic last year, and it is still somewhat of a big topic, there's still an aspect of it here this year. VR and AR. This is not particularly gendered, but it's potentially interesting. You know, are girls going to accept it? Is this a guy thing? How does it make people feel? Does anybody want to comment on VR and AR that collection of play patterns which has been traditionally associated with X chromosomes?
Well, I do see a whole lot of female VR, XR devs out there, and I think that's terrific. Many more XR devs than game devs, as far as I can tell, are women. I don't know if that's true. That's a cursory look. I'm on the board of the Virtual World Society, and both the gender balance on the board and the gender balance among the devs is pretty even Steven. There's tremendous opportunity, but it's not, if you're really doing VR, you're not looking at play patterns so much as you are looking at environments that are productive of play, which is different in a subtle way. So I think we're all trying to find our way around that, and I think female devs maybe have an advantage because our play has always, traditionally overlapping Gaussian. Narrative play is the constructive play of females. So creating narrative out of environments and situations is something that we do well. And creating the environments and situations out of which play can be made is something that we do well. So I feel there's great potential both from the development side and the customer side for these two technologies.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's a great opportunity. For sure.
I don't think there's going to be money in VR.
I don't care.
That's fine. Well, that's fine. I would just, I say that both to be provocative, but also VR is a very old technology.
Yeah.
We've been doing it for a long time, and I think that there are new markets and new ways to be paying for it. I'm Capricorn, I'm very money oriented. It's terrible. But it's something that when people are thinking about starting their own companies and what kinds of things they want to be doing, I think it's really important to understand, how are you going to monetize? And so I think VR has opportunities. I personally am much more excited about augmented reality.
Yeah, me too.
Because I think contextually the idea of making productive environments and finding play, but I always kind of break it down is how curious is the child? How curious is the person working on the experience? Before gender, before anything, what are they going to try to do? And I do think that there are different steps that men and women take, but that's it. I don't have to give any other part of it that's being gender-based.
I think one of the reasons why we've been starting to refer to this whole field as XR is because we see.
I've never heard that. That's cool.
Oh, well, now
That's
you.
good. I like that.
So,
XR.
yeah, AR and VR are not that
XR.
different. All you have to do is like opaque the screen for VR and translucent it. It's not a huge deal. And there are a bunch of things in between, like modeling and simulation, that can be blended together into augmented experiences of the natural world, of the social world, of the microscopic world. That opportunities abound, but putting ourselves in any of these little boxes is going to be premature, because I think the medium will turn into something that we used to mean when we said mixed reality, and XR is a way to say it's not mixed, it's a different fabric, and it has all these capacities, like electronics and textiles, right?
Well, but bluntly, it's going to be a moot point completely if we don't get the publisher and the developers to fund the women developers.
That's true.
Because we're still something like one woman for every 7 men that are funded. And so the women that are out there are a lot of women out there doing the XR work, and they're not getting funding.
That is very true.
So we're not-
Especially if they're over 26.
It's a whole different panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm 27, so
Me too.
is that hex or?
Dog years.
What do you think about augmented reality?
Laura's like,
No, I just referred to it as an umbrella. Look, how many technologies have we all lived through where, they are in the garage? So this is all just, I agree. At some point, money can't matter. And it's so devalued now because what is BlackRock has, I don't know how many trillion under management. So, it's there, but you got to try and go get it. But there's a lot of money out there and it needs to be dedicated to figuring this out. You're going to keep going to these events where it doesn't work when it's supposed to and you're standing and the headset on and you're like, what the hell am I doing with this? There's no interactive play.
Yeah.
But you got to get, these are baby steps until you can get to where you're going to hit the mother lode. And there do have to be women in that environment and in that creative brainstorming session to see where that unfolds.
And there's such terrific research opportunities. There's a vector for research funding in the XR world. Just, how do you make a smooth transition from AR to VR? You should be able to do that. And, what does that look like? That's a really damn good research question. I bet DARPA would pay for it, So there are other avenues for funding work if there's honest-to-God research in it that we might all be doing a better job of grabbing.
Well, having done, 17 different varieties of fashion closets with various technologies, I guarantee the fashion closet will be one of the home runs.
yes.
In some form of reality beyond what we are living in right now. Whatever that technology is,
probably
it
not
will
a
be
DARPA
driven by fashion.
I would buy it.
Exactly.
Pick a dress. Absolutely.
We're getting a Vive. My son got it for his birthday and putting it up in the room. And the only thing I want to play is tilt brush because I want to stand in the middle and dress, create the big princess dress. And my
Yes.
son's looking at me like, what a what? I'm like, honey, this is your mom's thing. He's like, oh, you're playing with it? I'm like, yeah, what do you think? But it's going to be great.
It already is in a lot of ways. Very exciting.
I consulted briefly for an AR company based in Australia, and they had a device with goggles and everything, and they put the computer in the backpack, and you were supposed to run around in a park playing this game, and aliens would attack you and so forth. But you were, it was AR, so you were, and of course part of the screen was obscured by things that were going on. And I said, have you considered the liability issues? Are you aware that, if you're hiding that, then what happens if a person steps into a manhole or stomps a little kid that they can't see because it's covered by an alien? And oh no, they'd never considered that because they're Australians and they don't live in a litigious society. So I never heard from them again.
Should we do Q&A?
Yes, I think it's time, yes. So, yes, well, thank you all very much for those insights and histories. And by all means, let's take questions. We'll start over here.
Hello. Thank you all for being here so much. It's incredible to hear you talk about your experiences. So I and maybe a couple other people here grew up in the 90s inspired by the stuff that you all made. And I was just wondering, when you were growing up, what inspired you?
Barbie.
Oh, how nice. Barbie.
I would say Barbie. People don't understand necessarily that Barbie, especially when I was growing up, is sort of a boat. Like you could put the aspirations that I had this dream. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, and going to New York and fashion and all these different things. And she was my avatar. She got dressed up and she went, and every couple of seconds she was doing something else. And I was like, that's what I want. So that part was very inspiring for me.
I was inspired by Girl Scouts. I really was.
Yeah.
And I still have trouble resisting a woman in a uniform.
So do I.
I was inspired by my dad. I was told that we were the first generation that could grow up and be our dads. And so I just, that was what is
so cool.
Building a business and defining and sort of obliterating the boundary. So
Dungeons and Dragons. I got lost in fantasy worlds and Dungeons and Dragons, and I could not understand why more girls weren't doing this because it was the most wonderful escape storytelling I'd ever been involved in.
Nice.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go over to the other side.
I think everyone's going to thank you for the panel. This was awesome. I just want to go back, I guess piggybacking off of all of your answers there, about the kind of mechanics, the act of play that went into these games. How much of that would you say was borrowed from things you'd seen before? How much were you inventing outright? And just that sort of sense of building these worlds of games at that time. Like that just historical question is really fascinating to me. And thank you so much.
I have a quick answer. Wait, the Secret Paths games were about the inner lives of girls. And if I had designed those games on the basis of what I thought I knew about the inner secret lives of girls, I would have done, Secret Garden. But when we went out and interviewed girls, they didn't want to take care of no stinking animals. They wanted the animals to take care of them. And they wanted magic stories. And it was, I would have been so wrong if I hadn't listened, if I had based everything on my own childhood. So, just a tidbit.
I had to play out everything with the doll. I would actually take all the Barbie dolls and I'd sit under my desk, and then I would doinky doink play it out and think, okay, again, I'm playing Barbie since I was till I was 16. And I was like, now what would I do next? Oh, this, and then that would be the next level of the game. And this is what we would do. And Barbie fashion designer, we had fabric that printed through the printer and you cut it out. We actually went through and made sure that the designs were right for girls and that it really was about the play pattern and not just what I wanted.
Yeah.
That was the key.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I say we worked, like I said, we worked with 3,000 high school, junior high school, and high school age girls to develop it, and we just kind of followed what they asked for and what they wanted to do. Was there anything out there? I would say maybe kind of like choose your own adventure, text adventure, story building stuff would kind of be where we were thinking, but we just did what the girls asked us for.
It's also really important. Mattel is a huge research facility. I mean, they do tons and tons of testing. So a lot of that also came from an enormous amount of information that was coming really fast.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's actually an incredibly insightful question because we didn't grow up knowing certain engines and informing, if I'm a Doom player, and then that'll inform how I'm going to develop a game. And so I found it to be very difficult. I chose Austin because I'm from Texas and that's where all the gamers were, but I had no idea how to explain to my programmers what I wanted them to do because they were coming from a lot of gameplay and I was coming from can you make it do this? And I needed to, and they, so that took a lot in that development process to get them to understand and for me to understand what the capacity was.
Thank you.
Over here.
Okay, thank you for the panel. I'm not an expert in this, so you can correct me if I get something wrong, but lately I've seen this kind of slightly new market for games that seem to be directed at moms rather than girls. I've seen games that are solitaire games set around a romance story in Regency, England, which is an excellent game, by the way, and other stories which are about sexy vampires solving jigsaw puzzles. So, I'm curious, how much do you think these games came out of the work you and others did in the 90s, and what do you think of them as kind of representing or at least part of the future from what you've worked on prior? Thank you.
I'm amazed it took so long for the romance genre to be realized in interactive, because it is such a huge category in books.
Yep.
And I don't think they took much from us. I think maybe just the idea that there's a vacant lot here, why don't we go see if this works? Because there are obviously customers for this type of narrative.
I'm pleased to see we're seeing them, and there seems to be this increase in them, and I'm pleased to see it. Again, it's new play pattern, different play pattern. I like seeing it.
I think it's also about how much time you have. So a mom wants to get in and have a game, and her game will be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, snackable, small, while the daughter might be on a mobile for hours in kind of getting all of her world into one place. So I think that that's about appealing to just different age groups.
And boomer women are really into puzzle games.
Yes.
As you know.
Yeah, it sounds like
Monument
it's
Valley
riffing
is
off of
number
that.
one in women over 50.
Yeah.
So, it's number one with a lot of groups, but, you know, it's incredibly popular. And then the older you get with women, the more they like the ones that are based on board games that they knew when they were kids.
Maybe I would hope that the people making them played our games and started there with the idea that now we can do games that are games we like.
I would like to know if you can all be available for the wrap-up room.
Sure.
I don't know where it is from here.
Let's do it outside.
On this-
Well,
yeah.
they usually
We'll
are
sit
down
here
at
until
the
they kick
end,
us out.
down at the, well, we're at
Okay.
the end, right? They're usually down at the end here, or I
Right.
think they're around the other
Okay.
hallway.
Well, follow the hat. And,
They're around the other hallway,
but,
and they will ask us not to.
Yeah,
stand
I'm very
outside.
sorry for those of you who've been waiting to ask a question, but we have in fact run out of time. So I want to thank you all very much for coming, and I want to give a huge round of applause.